You are sacrificing over $200 million cash flow for a stake on the market. You have to tell the Ghanaian people how much you're going to generate.
You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, as you know, always, we put Ghana first. So you have heard CSOs, opposition, persons who are experts, absolutely neutral as far as the political banter is concerned, speak their mind on this issue. It does appear so far it's only the government that finds everything good about the Agyapa deal. Those who are speaking, do they really have a case? We will interrogate all of those issues right here this morning. Let me welcome Bright Simmons of MPed degree and honorary executive of Imani Africa. Bright, good morning and welcome to Newsfile.
Good morning very much, Samson.
Right. So, Abdul Malik Kubako is editor-in-chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper. I introduced him earlier. He's here. His documents were here ahead of time. Welcome, Kuku.
Thank you, my brother.
Right. And as I indicated to you, we'll also be speaking to Steve Manteao, who has a lot of expertise in this area and belongs to the alliance of CSOs in the extractive industry and anti-corruption CSOs that spoke against this deal. Charles Edubuahing is the Deputy Finance Minister, and he's the one we've been waiting for a while. I actually wanted to start with him. Unfortunately, he's not here yet. So we will start anyway. Now, if you like, let me begin going to Bright Simmons. And Bright, I have just this morning cited, you have released, I suppose Imani Ghana didn't release this earlier. You have just released a statement in which is an Imani alert, and you explain why the CSOs oppose the current Agyapa deal. So let's begin with you. What are your major issues with the deal?
Thank you very much, Samson. I have a view that it will be useful to re-emphasize why the input of CSOs are critical in this matter, because we've had some comments. I think some comments from the Minister of Information may suggest that civil society organizations are perhaps not very relevant in this discussion. Well, those were not his exact words, but you could construe some of his comments to mean that. I think when you look at this transaction and you realize that you need more than 300 pages of documents just to get a handle on the key terms and provisions, to suggest that ordinary citizens who are going about their business and are busy with the day-to-day management of their lives will be reading these documents to make an informed democratic view of whether they support the government or not, is completely naive.
Apart from the information minister, because you couldn't quote him directly, the finance minister himself had said this, that he was pained, that it was painful for the CSOs to use words like elite capture. And then he said, this has been very public. Then he said he discounted the letter that these CSOs issued. So that's one of those comments.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So discounting the letter means he regards the letter as irrelevant. The point of the matter is that you have more than 300 pages of documents. You yourself, as a senior journalist in this country, you've seen those documents. To expect that an ordinary citizen with all the day-to-day hassle of living in Accra or Kumasi or Sunyane will be able to go through these documents to make an informed position about whether or not they support the government is completely unrealistic. So it's the role of organizations like us and ours to spend time to go over these documents so that we can provide a dispassionate and objective perspective that can help ordinary citizens to also come to some conclusions that are informed and balanced. And that role, I think, is quite critical, given the fact of politics as we see it. Unless the position is that once somebody is elected and then sent to Parliament or sent to the Jubilee House, that person has the complete authority to disregard any further views of citizens in the way that they formulate policy. I don't think that is sound. Having made that point, I need to also establish that it's a very multidisciplinary document.
Now, hold on. So what you just said, the concerns you just raised, Steve Mantea, Dr. Steve Mantea raised the same concern that once we have voted for you, it's not over. So you don't suggest as though once we voted for you, it's a blank check. You do whatever you want, and then we have no participation. Then I've heard Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh also, express disquiet about the posture and attitude. Does that suggest, from the statement you have made, that at the time of going to the press, the CSOs had familiarized themselves with what was necessary and so knew enough to make the categorical statements that they made?
For those specific CSOs that have come out to oppose this agreement in its current form, yes. We have looked at every single document. We have looked at that. In fact, we've even gone further to look at some of the advice that have been tendered by Merrill Lynch and other advisors of the government. We've done extensive benchmarking using data that's available in other countries. I would say that on account of the simple sheer facts, we are the most informed segment of the society as at this point to help the public come to terms what is a fairly elaborate arrangement that the government has decided to pursue.
Right. So if that were the case,
I think the other, yes.
If that were the case, at the time of this press conference, the CSO has suggested that they needed to know the beneficial owners. Has the listing been done? Have the shares been bought yet? The 49% shares that will be offloaded. Have they yet been bought? So who are the beneficial owners that you are interested in?
We have two entities that are already existing, Agyapa Royalties Ghana and Agyapa Royalties. Government purportedly owns 100%, right?
That's so.
The concern that have been raised is that there were claims being made. There were what you might call deep throat claims being made, that there were already nominee positions being held by the government on behalf of some investors. We don't have that fact for now, for sure, but we thought it would be useful for the government to completely dispel those rumors. So whether or not Agyapa, as is currently listed in the bailiwick of Jersey, or Agyapa, the one that is incorporated in Ghana, the 100% share that government holds, there are no agreements, secret agreements that holds any stake or equity in those vehicles for any transactional advisor or bank or whatsoever. For that fact, we were making it clear that it would be helpful for the government to completely dispel the rumors that were circulating. This was not an emphatic claim that we know for sure that some beneficial holders are using government as nominee shareholders for their stakes in those structures. The other point that I thought was important that we make is that it's also a very multidisciplinary transaction. To properly evaluate it, you need some perspective from finance, from policy, from law, indeed, even from natural resource governance. In order for an effective discussion to be had, a platform like the CSO organizations, which have those skills spread across multiple organizations, is a perfect counterparty for the government in engaging some of these discussions for the benefit of the general public. And we felt, therefore, that it was quite unfair for the government to suggest that not engaging the CSOs was the right course to pursue. I must also emphasize that since we reached the zenith of government CSO interaction and relationship management in this country, I will say this government is the one that has seen the least need to engage with CSOs comprehensively and holistically when it comes to policy making.
Right. So before you
proceed, the truth of the matter is that you've never seen CSOs consistently come together to oppose government policy as you've seen in this administration. And the reason is simply that the government does not think it needs the inputs of CSOs at all.
Right.
But those are just preliminary comments. Can I go now to make my comments?
No,
yes,
now I need to ask a second question, because you say that these CSOs had familiarized themselves sufficiently with the documentation, and therefore could make the conclusive statements that they were making. For example, how come, therefore, that they suggest that the tax exemptions that are being dealt with and the need, for example, to resort to a tax haven was something that was very strange, when in fact the parent law that was made in 2018 provides in section 35 that the minimal income paid to the fund and dividend payable by the fund or special purpose vehicle are not taxable.
I know where you're going. No, that is not the point. The point is that tax efficiency is not the only reason people list in tax havens. You understand that? Tax efficiency is just one benefit. The other benefit is secrecy. The other benefit is reduced public scrutiny of certain types of transactions. The other benefit for which reason people list in tax havens is the ability to make share transfers that are less tax exposed, etc., etc. Now, those same reasons are why CSOs are worried that a sovereign wealth fund, for its very first major vehicle, would decide to choose the bailiwick of JC. There's also the fact, and that is why I have to probably start getting into our substantive points now, perhaps with your permission.
Yes, let's go.
It's also the fact that given the way that this deal has been structured, the fact that it's listed in tax haven offers no further advantage. Now, I'll go into the substantive points, and I'll limit them for now to 4 critical ones. There's several. In fact, we've done a lot of, we've made a lot of effort to try to look for something in the agreement to commend it to Ghanaians, and we're struggling. But these are the 4 key ones. One is that the $1 billion valuation for 75.6% of our royalties indefinitely in almost all the major gold producing assets that we have. Remember, the prospective licenses, the existing mining licenses, the royalty entitlements that we are investing into this vehicle covers virtually 100% of all our gold resources. So the argument that somehow it does not is not very realistic. There are about 5 gold companies in this country that produce 80% or more of the gold that we produce in the formal sector. Remember that in the informal sector, we are still struggling to tax those activities. So in the formal sector, more or less, we're giving 75.6% of all our gold to this entity. The remaining amount, remember, is completely encumbered. The remaining amount goes to the Mineral Development Fund, which is disbursed among a number of agencies. The 4.6% or whatever it is that remains, 4.4% or whatever that remains, is for the MRI's own bureaucratic use and also for the ministry. So in those circumstances, more or less, all our gold is going away. That is the reality of that transaction.
They have clearly identified. They have clearly identified 16 of the companies, 12 of them that are actually in the business, and 4 of them are supposed to be in the exploratory state. So is it accurate? Is it accurate to say all?
We see 48 assets in the agreement from prospecting licenses and the rest of it. So this is one of the things that we wait for the minister to come and explain. They mentioned that there are 12 and then there's 4. We count 48. The schedules to the agreement includes the cadastral maps, etc., the whole range of transactions. The fact is that it's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that the 16, even if there were those 16 companies that they've identified, Chirano, Newmont, Goldfields, and Lugo Ashanti, Asanko, etc., those are 100% of our gold production. And the most valuable resources that we have for further prospecting have also been added. Furthermore, they have something called the optional mining licenses in the agreement, which purpose to grant the same structure the capacity to actually get more. So if additional discoveries were made that were outside the remit of this, they have rights of first refusal, because the way that it's been structured, they are preemption rights. So more or less, we didn't all go to this entity. There's no discussion of that. I'll tell you for a fact that if you look at those companies and look at the current gold production and you map them, there is no other room for any significant gold production in this country that does not go to Agyapa. So to give it away at $1 billion valuation is problematic. And it's a very tricky point. So I need to take my time and explain it a little bit. One, first of all, we say that this $1 billion is too little. And at the same time, we make the argument they may not even get the $1 billion. Now, let me explain why. One, the reason is very simple. To choose to go to the public stock markets as opposed to the private markets for this transaction was the fundamental transactional flaw at its heart. The public markets provide investors. These are the best investors in the world. These are the investors with the deepest pockets in the world. They have the best instruments available. They have so many avenues to expose themselves to the positives of gold. like exchange traded funds, index funds, etc., that they are not that enthused about investing in an asset like this. So when you look at the price earning ratio analysis, and we've looked at the one that Merrill Lynch has done, we don't think it's very smart because it doesn't look at PER at the time of IPO, a few months at IPO. It looks at price earning ratios now. If you look at it at the time of IPOs and you look at the current entity that is listed on the largest stock exchange, in fact, the only gold royalty streaming company similar to the one we want to set up on the London Stock Exchange today on the main bourse, that is Anglo-Pacific Group, you will see that price earning ratios in the region of about 5, which is exactly what we are aiming to hit. What that means is that valuation of $1 billion on the public market is as good as it gets. The problem is that why do we need the public markets if all we're trying to do is to raise some money up front and then later get some cash flow? The worst thing you can do is to go and lock all your royalty streams indefinitely into a transaction where you more or less get all the money up front and there's no other fiscal room, but that money that you get is far less than you could get if you went to any of the hundreds of gold streaming companies in the world, from Franco-Nevada, we've seen that they've analyzed, from Osisko, from Metalla, from Maverick, there are hundreds of them. And you told them that we want to assign 20% or 15% of our royalties for over 10 or 15 years to you. You will get similar to what you're trying to get from the stock market, that $500 million out of the $1 billion valuation that we are trying to squeeze out. You will get it if you went directly to go streaming companies and did that transaction. But better than that, you would then still have about 50-something% more, maybe even 60% of your royalties still available to receive in the form of cash flow. The problem with this transaction, this structure, this is my second point, the problem with this structure is that you don't get the royalties going forward. So the idea that somehow it's debt, because it's not a debt transaction, it's good for our books, is purely, in my view, naive. Because next year, you won't have the $200 million that you could make from gold, right? Now, if you don't get that money next year, you're going to borrow to plug that shortfall. So this is merely deferring. But more problematically, if you are only spending a small part of the transaction directly in a private market transaction, and you got the money, you will still have a lot of royalties remaining, which will then ensure cash flow. The argument the government has made is that dividends.
Yes. The issue you raise about next year needing money and it's not being available, is that not what exactly the government is seeking to do? That I get so much upfront, which would not have been available to me this year. So I get as much as I may have gotten in the next, say, 5 years upfront to do what I need to do. So next year, I'm not expecting that money.
Okay. Except, let me explain that because that's an important point.
Except that what the $500 million coming in is equity, it is not loan. And then Ghana still has 50 plus 1% in this vehicle. And the entity will be dealing and trading. And the profits that will come, the dividends that will come,
it doesn't work like that.
Ghana will still benefit.
My time to break it down. It doesn't work like that. First of all, those are distinctions without a difference. The amount of money that we are raising upfront is too small to justify losing access to the cash flow over the term of the agreement. Remember, this is an agreement with no effective term, a point I will come to subsequently. So what is the problem? Here is the problem. When you decide to borrow, to receive this money in the current structure of the deal, the argument that somehow you're not paying interest is not very smart. Let me tell you why. The cost of listing on the stock market and the continued cost of maintaining it on the stock market can be in the region of between 7 to 10%. So we're going to spend, if we raise $1 billion, we could potentially spend, and this is the very important point, we could potentially spend $70 million pursuing $1 billion. It's not that difficult. If you look at the fees for brokers, fees for lawyers, fees for other transaction advisors, etc., you could conceivably get to that amount. And don't forget, any underwriter is going to charge fees. Significantly, it will be fees that are a percentage of funds raised. Now, that means that you need to treat that as an interest rate because it behaves similarly. Even though you are getting the money upfront, It's more or less a 1-year term transaction if you want to do some benchmarking. And you have to compare that against the fact that this is a country that for 7-year transaction with a 7-year life, we often pay something in the region of 6.5%. So if you're paying something close to 10% to raise the money, to think that that is not an effective interest rate is playing with the semantics. So whether it's interest rate or you call it something else, the costs are important. And the cost of this structure is quite prohibitive if you consider other alternatives. The second point is this. Because you are undervaluing the asset by using the public listing approach, as opposed to doing a private market transaction. And why do we know that? We know that because we've looked at several IPOs, including the famously aborted one by Triple Flag, and then looked at several private market transactions involving gold royalty streaming companies, compared them, and we found that it's much more efficient to raise the money in a private market transaction than to list on the stock market. So that is one reason why we know for sure that the valuation of $1 billion could be much improved. Then on top of it, if you were to then decide to go on the private market route and therefore raise the valuation, you could get as much money upfront as you are trying to do now, but you will still have royalties left, which will guarantee you cash flow going into the future. So my argument would be, why will you not go for the best of both worlds? Why will you want to pack all of it into this structure and then list in a time when we know for sure?
All right, so Bright Simmons, the connection to Bright Simmons, it's having a little bit of a challenge. We will re-establish it and then get back to you. So Bright Simmons is representing the CSOs that are against this deal, and he's explaining why we have better options. He's explaining why, for example, they suggest that the $1 billion valuation of these massive resources or resource entitlement is unconscionable and amounts to undervaluing Ghana's resources by over 65%. That's the claim that they make. They suggest that less than 25% of future royalties should go for that amount of money in any such transaction. Their position, as you have heard him explain, is backed by a review of several royalty streaming transactions around the world. So they insist that a private market transaction would be superior to a public listing in this regard. Of course, he began by canvassing for us what they are appalled at by pronouncements by some ministers, particularly he names the information minister, and also we've heard a finance minister talk about how he was hurt by the claim by these CSOs that there was an elite capture and that there was opacity and that there was a lethal disadvantage, their own words, in this deal. And because of that, the finance minister said he discounted the letter. That is, their concerns put together in a letter. He discounted it. Several other CSO leaders have said this is wrong. And he states that it is in this regime that you have the CSOs almost always having to come together collectively. So if there was an issue with the election procurement matters or whether there should be registration, you had over a double dozen CSOs coming together. If you have Daniel Yao Domelevo being removed, quote unquote removed,
thank you,
then they come up and you have in excess of 400 CSO leaders signing to disapprove and ask the government to recall him. In this matter, there are 12 CSO organizations coming together, and they say they have studied the documentation around this thing, and their conclusion is that this is very bad. If for nothing at all, they say that it is unconscionable and amounts to undervaluing Ghana's resources by over 65%. They say that we can get what we are asking now without putting 75% of our mineral royalties, but by putting only 25% of our mineral royalties. Charles Edubuahim is getting ready to join us now. Then he will help us to go ground zero break down when we started, where we are now, and answer the questions that are associated with this development. Bright is back. Hello, Bright.
Sorry, Samson.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure where I got cut off.
No. So clearly, you are done. You are done with canvassing your point to explain that we are undervaluing the Ghana's resources by over 65%, and that we can get what we are looking for if we did private listing rather than public, and we could use only 25% rather than the 75%. So the next point is what?
Okay, so no, I wasn't talking about a private listing. I was saying that in the private markets. So say you went to Franco-Nevada or any of these companies that do gold streaming, right, and you did a direct contract with them. If we look at the tenure of transactions and the trend in transaction valuation over the last couple of years, we've concluded they would have made far more in a direct contract with a gold streaming company than seeking to create a vehicle and list it. So that was the point that I was making. And I was saying, therefore, that if they did that, they will raise the same amount of money, but we'll still have royalties left, which will guarantee us cash flow going into the future. So it's both upfront money and also cash flow rich. What we have now is that it's only upfront money, not very cash flow rich. And the reason why it's not cash flow rich is because the dividend yields in these type of transactions are bad. So you cannot really rely on dividends for cash flow going forward.
In fact, where traditionally, mineral royalty companies look to pay dividends in about 30%, this deal, we are seeking to pay as much as 50% in dividends. That's what the minister tells us.
Well, it makes, I don't understand what that means.
They suggest that this company, if it lives up to why it is set up, it could double or even triple the gains in the next 2 years.
Well, that's capital gains, which is a completely different conversation. We'll come to that. But when it comes to dividends, we have a lot of experience in this country where government owns 10% equity interest in a bunch of almost all the mining firms, apart from, I think, Newmont and AngloGold Ashanti. And AngloGold Ashanti, we own equity in the global structure. So we own almost 2% in AngloGold Ashanti globally. And ask how much we received in dividends from AngloGold Ashanti. Last I checked, I think this was about 2018, we're doing something in the region of about $300,000, and the year before or the year after, we're doing something in the region of $570,000. So dividends have never been an effective cash flow mechanism, and we need an effective cash flow mechanism. If you look at some of the other peer companies in the gold streaming business that are listed, those that have characteristics similar to ours, we are looking at dividend yields that are very low. And because dividend yields are low, this is not an efficient cash flow structure. That is the point. So now I move on to my third point. Can I do that with your permission?
Yes, please proceed.
My third point is in relation to the legal structure of the agreement. We've taken note of successive pieces of advice by the Attorney General. And those elements of advice that have been given are not reflected in the final documents, particularly the agreements that have been signed, and also, even in some respects, in the way that we've gone ahead to change some of the statutory regimes. I'll focus on the agreements.
Yes, please, can we do it this way? Can we do it this way?
Yes, I'll do it very quickly.
Wait, hold on. Hold on. Bright, hold on. Bright, hold on. You say that advice given by the Attorney General, our lawyer, as in the citizens and the government's lawyer, have not reflected in the agreements.
Yes.
I like us to take that point by point. The Attorney General's very final communication raises issues with seven outstanding concerns it had raised earlier in the first and in its second advice, which it said had not been incorporated, and therefore, subject to incorporating those, the deal was above board. It was okay. So let's take them one by one. So you show us how exactly you come to the conclusion that these do not reflect. Number one, the Attorney General said, we have maintained in all our advice to the Ministry of Finance that the assignment agreement should receive parliamentary approval. Please refer to our advice dated 28th May 2020, 22nd July 2020, and 5th August 2020. So number one, assignment agreement should be approved by Parliament. This has been done. This has been done.
Before you go on, because I think I get your point, but there is a challenge. We've seen the letters starting from the one in 28th May, the famous 28th May one, all the way through the 22nd July one, the 5th August, and a couple of others. Now, what is the fact? Is that you can see the arguments that were raised about certain provisions and terms in the agreement as they continue. And then you can see that 12th August letter from the Minister of Justice, where she proposed to suggest that these are actually the outstanding matters. They don't correlate. And I will show you why. I will very quickly prove to you why.
No, I was hoping, Bright, sorry, I was hoping that yes, we could go in a certain procedure. We know that they had the back and forth, but the eventual outcome is the 12th of August 2020
and that is why I'm trying to explain to you how that came
which is on the revised version of the project or the agreement.
So let me explain very clearly, because this is very important.
Yes, but here, the Attorney General's concerns remain 7 items.
No, that's not correct.
There are 7 items. Please, that's correct. There are 7 items.
Let me explain the reason why that's not correct.
No, there are 7 items. If you say that's not correct, I am unable to agree with you, because the Attorney General's document has 7 items.
No, the reason is simple. It has raised issues in previous letters which have not been addressed. Those issues remain in the final agreement, but in its 12th August letter, it claims that these are the outstanding issues. So what that means, therefore, is that it had abandoned the earlier recommendations.
No, it had not abandoned the earlier recommendations, Bright. Please, can we take it line by line? It has not abandoned. It says, if you don't mind, let's read it. It says, we refer to our various advice dated 1st April 2019, 28th May 2020, 22nd July 2020, and 5th August 2020, and the transaction advices TA comments dated 12 June 2020 and 22nd July 2020, respectively on the Kingdom investment arrangement for the proposed monetization of Ghana's mineral royalties. We also refer to the meeting held on the 10th of August 2020 and your subsequent letter number so and so, together with the draft agreement. The letter indicates that our earlier comments on the draft agreements have been duly incorporated. This is the word I was coming to. We have all the time, Bright. Relax. We have all the time for today. Today we are discussing only this. So the Attorney General says the issues we raise in the draft agreement have been duly incorporated and request our final review and no objection. Then she says you have incorporated them except 7 other issues.
No.
Why are you saying no? I'm reading to you.
Very carefully. No, relax. We have the letters from the very beginning, 28th May, 22nd July, etc. You understand me?
That's right.
We know the issues that were raised in them, right?
That's right.
If we look at the final agreement and we see that those issues have not been resolved, it does not matter what the Attorney General said on 12 August. Does that logic come across clearly to you? We know
okay, so what I'm relating to you, Bright, what I'm relating to you is not what the Attorney General has not said. What I'm relating to you is what the Attorney General has said. But you have an issue. You have an issue with what the Attorney General has said.
The Attorney General's position.
Okay.
You understand my point?
Okay.
We dispute the Attorney General's position.
Okay.
We have seen the letters from the Attorney General to the Finance Minister dated 28 May.
Proceed and demonstrate to us.
So when you take the suggestion that was made in the previous advice, particularly 22nd July, that there should be a fixed term through the transaction, preferably 30 years, because most mining leases are 30 years. That is not reflected in the final agreement. In the final agreement, the counterparty, the beneficiary in this case, the counterparty in this case, Agyapa, still has the capability for successor agreements and renewal leases to be considered as part of the original term. So there's still no fixed term. Now, that was a point that was raised and canvassed earlier on by the Attorney General. If for some reason by the 12th of January, after meeting the Finance Minister, the Attorney General decided to abandon its own line of advice, that is not to say that we were dealt with.
All right. Now, Bright, on that issue, doesn't the agreement say that the time, if there's a term limit, it is tied to the lease that the mining concessions or operators have? Is that not what it says?
So, no, so the life of the lease,
and when
the life of the lease,
yes,
it incorporates renewals, incorporates replacements, etc.
Exactly.
Which was the point that our own advisors, even before we saw the Attorney General's documents, had raised. So when we saw the Attorney General's document and we saw that that was reflected, we were quite surprised that the Attorney General will abandon that line of advice, because we think it's a very critical piece of advice. To create an indeterminate, an agreement of indeterminate life, using the Attorney General's own argument, is completely unconscionable. So that is one.
Right.
Secondly,
now hold before we go to the second issue. Hold on, Bright. The thing is tied to the life of a license. The license has an expiration date.
Yes.
But we say, whilst it is tied to the life of the license of the operator, if the operator renews their license, it will continue to be in force. Now, if I am dealing with you in this regard, is it not possible at any time to determine that I am not interested in the relationship? What is our fear?
No. What I'm saying is that when you take any lease, so there are 2 points here. Because of the fact that the government retains some discretion for extensions, replacements, etc., etc., etc. When you tie the agreement to the life of a lease, effectively you have an indeterminate end point, because that lease life could extend. The second point is that because we've added prospecting licenses to the portfolio, we have to wait till they convert. And if they were to convert 10 years later, because of whatever reasons, and there are a lot of discretion in the mining laws, that time begins from then, because now you have another lease. So effectively, this could continue for a very long time. Let me give a very good example that will be interesting also. When you take Pristia Sankofa, the nature of the entire structure of that particular opportunity is that we are recovering gold waste. Now, it's a potential. It's very easy to assume that a lot of these assets that we have, new technologies will come up that will make it possible to renew the life of those mines to a much longer extent than we've been able to do so far. So the fact that the term is not indeterminate is beyond dispute and beyond debate. Let me go on to my second example.
Okay, so Bright, yes. Bright, before I get to the second example,
yes,
what is the fear about the term being indeterminate? Where
because
wait, can I finish my question? Where you have parties who sort of have equal powers. In fact, that Ghana will have 50 plus 1% in the transaction. So what is the fear about the term not being fixed?
That 50.51% is not cast in stone. That is also something that the public has not properly evaluated. That 51% could be overturned if there's an oversubscription and they exercise their right to give away additional equity. So there's no 51% that's cast in stone. That's one. Number two,
the assurance is that Ghana will keep 51%. So we should take them by their word.
The agreement offers the option for Ghana not to do that. The second point that is important is that if we had wanted to maintain control, then if you go to the listing, you find out that you can go in as a sovereign-controlled commercial company. That is the only way in which you evade that requirement for independence and arm's length, etc., that we are struggling with. We decided not to go in for a sovereign-controlled company, a structure. Okay. We decided to go in as a standard listing. You get my point? So as a standard listing, the independent directors have extraordinary latitude to block us in many ways. So we don't have that latitude that you claim we have.
Can you go to your second point?
Changes to the agreement itself will require independent directors
to
approve.
Go to your second point. So in the first point, you essentially demonstrate by your arguments and you're showing that the Attorney General may have been lying to us when it says that the concerns had been incorporated in the revised version. You say it has not happened.
No, it's not. No, I'm very clear. It's not lying to us. By the time we get to 12 August, the Attorney General had abandoned its own line of advice.
Okay.
It had abandoned the things it thought was important and has come up with some 7 things that, as far as we are concerned, were trivial.
No, it says that
apart from the parliamentary approval,
it says that what it had advised had been incorporated.
But it hadn't been.
So that's the point I was mentioning to you. That in that case,
it had abandoned its advice.
Do you still say abandoned?
Addressed.
Okay.
It considered them addressed, and we are saying they are not addressed. The second issue that they raise, which the Attorney General thinks addressed, but we believe is not addressed, is this issue of incidental cost being potential losses. The Attorney General, whoever drafted it, had a very eagle eye, and he had seen that there was an attempt to have indemnification in respect of incidental losses, incidental costs, constructed as potential losses. And so you can't do that because this gives them a huge room to misbehave. That is still in the final agreement. I'll go to the third issue. In many instances, Agyapa is allowed to hold on to an obligation on a best efforts basis. It will do its best. Ghana, however, is held to strict liability in many of these clauses. The Attorney General argued that there was weak reciprocity in a lot of terms. When you read the final agreement that was approved, you'll find out that there are still instances of weak reciprocity. I'll go to the last one. Even though there are several of them, there's no time. I'll go to the last one.
All right.
The reviewer makes a really profound point about the nature of this agreement having become a tool to which now a private company determines stabilization agreements and stabilization terms for Ghana on Ghanaian assets. He said even the Minister of Finance, by law, can only do a 15-year stabilization or development agreement. What this has done for Agyapa is that because any changes that affect it materially, that has a materially adverse effect on Agyapa's money, is banned, or at the very least heavily constrained, it transmutes into operation as a stabilization agreement.
What's the stabilization agreement? What's the concept?
So you know the way the stabilization agreements are drafted. If you are coming to invest in a country, you say, don't make changes in your laws that will affect my profits.
Right.
Right? The country agrees to it. Now, what we have done is that because we've sent royalties, we've apportioned royalties to Agyapa. Agyapa is saying that any changes that are made to these companies whose royalty is going to be getting, that may have an effect on the royalties that it will get. Those changes are constrained. So it operates as a stabilization agreement.
Right. Now,
the Attorney General argued that even the Finance Minister does not have that wide remit in law. So Agyapa shouldn't be allowed to come through the back door that way. Our argument is that that issue was not addressed in the final agreement. These are just 4 examples, and there are many. 4 examples.
Okay, so
trivial ones.
Right. So Bright, you hold it on there for me, and I'll come back again and try to understand a couple more of the points that Imani in its alert has raised about the timelines to the fundraising, which you suggest is almost impossible, and so on and so forth. But the Attorney General, in this very final communication to the Finance Minister, indicates that the advice it has given at various points, at least on 4 different occasions, the things it wanted to change, which Bryce Simmons acknowledges that those who worked on the agreement at the Attorney General's department did a very good job. They had an eagle's eye and they saw a lot of things that were not good for Ghana, and they pointed them out and insisted that those things ought to be changed. The Attorney General in its last letter says it finds that these earlier comments that it made had been duly, the word they use is duly incorporated, except that if they will continue and go ahead with it, there are 7 other things that remain outstanding that have to be taken care of. Bright suggests to us that whilst the Attorney General suggests in this letter, proclaims in this letter that these are the only things outstanding, it does appear there is more than that. Now, the first thing it asked for was that there are 5 different agreements that relate to this deal. And the first thing the Attorney General asked for was that the assignment agreement needs parliamentary approval. As we know, there were 5 agreements that were taken to Parliament. It included the assignment agreement. The Attorney General wrote this on the 12th, and the whole deal went to Parliament the next day, on the 13th. We will find out, whilst we understand Charles is joining us shortly, whether everything, all the 7 things that the Attorney General spoke about were taken care of. I will try to canvass those I have seen and cross-check that have been taken care of with you. Now, Kweku, so let's see. Generally, preliminary, what would you say overall? If you were making, say, a 2-minute commentary to start with, before you go to any substance, what's your appreciation of this deal as far as it benefits or does not benefit Ghana?
Well, of course, I will not be speaking from the position of an expert, but of course, as an analyst of some of these issues, I've listened to all sides. I find the Minister of Finance's position more persuasive relative to the mission that they have set to undertake. But I want to make a quick point on this civil society organizations and their involvement in such issues. It's very important. I am an advocate of civil society activism and advocacy. And I believe it's very important for democratic consolidation. But there's something that I'm surprised at. The hint, the intention to undertake this exercise didn't begin today. Indeed, if you, as we know, the act itself was passed in 2018.
Okay.
And then if you go to the 2018 and 2019 budgets, there were hints there.
Okay. Before you do that, I need to bring to Bright Simmons' attention 2 quick things I don't want to forget. Bright Simmons had referred to the information minister as being naive. I didn't hear that, but my attention has been drawn to that. Bright, would you want to retract that? I suspect that the information minister has been sufficiently informed on these matters and has been dealing with them. Would you want to retract that?
Sorry, I'm not sure what context naive was used. I don't recall saying the information minister was naive. I might have said that something that he said in respect of the fact that citizens themselves are sufficient to are capable of evaluating these matters.
All right.
If that was the implication of his statement, that would be naive. Doesn't mean that he himself is naive, of course. Thank you.
All right. I thought, though I didn't particularly pay attention, I thought that would be an unfair statement to make on him. Again, last point, the Attorney General says she did not abandon any of her previous positions, and that at each point they gave advice on the basis of documents that were made available to them, and they stuck to their advice from first to the last day. And so they never abandoned any of their advice. Thank you.